Katharine was back June for her 10th reunion, and so we weren't sure we were going to be able to get her back. It's kind of a long trip from New York City, but we are so thrilled to have her here. This is our first of our, we did have a lecture series speaker last week, but it was on Thursday night, so she's our official Friday noon speaker for the fall, and we couldn't think of anyone better to come in and inspire all you guys. It's been pretty impressive what she's accomplished in the last 10 years since she graduated. I'm going to read you her bio because I think that's a good way to give you an idea of what she's been doing. Katharine has a track record as a banker, entrepreneur, and social innovator. Katharine helped to found OrganJet Corporation, where she is now an advisor. She co-founded GM Microfinance Bank in northern Vietnam, which provides loans, savings, and training services to rural farmers. Prior to Vietnam, Katharine spent 4 years with Deutsche Bank's Leverage Finance Group in New York and Mergers and Acquisitions Group in Paris. She holds her BA from Middlebury College, an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business, and a master's in Public Administration in International Development at Harvard Kennedy School. Katharine was awarded Harvard's Women in Public Policy Program Fellowship and Harvard's Carr Center for Human Rights Fellowship. Katharine served as co-president of the GSB Social Venture Club, founder of the HKS Impact Investing Group, and two-time director of keynote speakers for Harvard's Social Enterprise Conference. Katharine was founding member of 3 social enterprises, including a well drilling kit for Ethiopian farmers, and has taught social enterprise and innovation as a teaching fellow at Harvard College. She was recently named one of AOL makers as part of AOL and PBS series titled Women Who Make America. She wrote a graduate thesis at Harvard on public and private insurance coverage of kidney transplants in her policy paper titled Imaginative Logistics Solution for Kidney Transplantation in the U.S., Facilitating Miracles and How to Pay for It. Thank you for being here. We can't wait to hear.
Okay, well, it's quite a reading. First off, I am thrilled to be here today and honored. And it's so exciting to see how many people who are involved in social enterprise, social innovation. It certainly is very different from the days I was here in 2002. And so it's great just to see also, having spent time in a number of universities, how Middlebury has taken such a lead in this and been so forward-thinking, because I really do think that today's leaders and tomorrow's leaders want to be empowered with the skills to challenge some of the most pressing problems today and to do it now. And so to have the skills and to know that so many students are thinking about how do I do this, it's not in 25 years after I built my career, but how do I tackle these now with the skills that I have is really exciting and great. And so I wanted to do 2 things today and make it interactive and make it productive for you and practical. So I wanted to, one, just share a little bit about the decisions that I made in the path that I took, just as one example. There's no right way to get into the field, but I certainly took one path, and I think it's helpful to hear how people think about that and why you did certain things. And then I wanted to open up to a few questions that I would have liked to ponder more deeply when I was in college. And so I was thinking about some questions that I often get asked, and really the overriding theme today is how do you align your passion and your interests with your skill set to have a kind of a life of deep impact. We're all sitting here today with the luxury of being able to think about these problems, just knowing full well that 70% of the world is just focused on like, how do I eat today, how do I clothe? And so I do really think that it's a luxury and also, in some sense for many people, kind of a responsibility, and also just a great adventure to think about how to combine your skills with something that's really important. So I wanted to do that and then open up to questions. But before I did that, I just wanted to get a sense of who's here today and where you are in thinking about social innovation. So I'd love it if you could raise your hand if you're currently part of a team that you would consider a social enterprise. Or in the past, you've worked on a social enterprise. just raise your hand high. Yeah. And who considers themselves a social entrepreneur? Who has an idea? Does anyone here, like, raise your hand if you have kind of an idea? We met a student today who certainly has an idea and a drive. Raise your hand if you have kind of, maybe it's one or two, but you certainly have an idea that you hope to implement, maybe not today, but maybe in 5 or 10 years. And then raise your hand if, like, you just really want to figure out how to get into this space. You're not necessarily the idea person, but you're really just thinking through, like, how do I do this, and how do I think through maybe what is my skill? Okay, good. And how many people here are from America? Okay. And what about freshmen? And seniors? And then, sorry, final question. How many people here are doing something that you consider like quantitative, like financial numbers? Okay. So some of the questions that I thought would be interesting to talk about today would be, some of these, like, should I go? When do I do this? Like, what skills do I need to be effective? What are the first steps? And so we'll get into that in a second. But first, I wanted to just share with you one example. I don't know who here uses Prezi, but I just started. This is my first Prezi. This is just one example of the path that I took. If you'd asked me in 2002 whether I would be, in Dien Bien Phu, Vietnam, setting up a microfinance program, or, getting kicked out of transplant centers in the U.S. because we're trying to change the flow of capital in organ transplantation, I would have really not believed you. So this is the path that I took. And I wanted to just bring it back to Middlebury 2002 when there was no center and I'd never heard of social enterprise or social innovation. And some of the things that I was thinking about as I, ambled through many different majors and, everything, the world is your oyster. The first overriding thing was I knew that I wanted to have, a life of meaning and really contribute. And that was really important to me, and I think it is, for all of us in the room. So that meaning and impact were really important. And I knew early on that kind of my metric and currency was probably not going to be how much money I made, and it was probably going to be number of lives touched or, the impact I had on my community, the environment. And then also, I was really thinking about like how to do something in a unique way. I really didn't want to kind of just be a banker. I wanted to really do something that was innovative and disruptive. Didn't know what that was either. And then I think another thing that I was thinking about, it's easier thinking about it in retrospect. I think if you'd asked me in 2002, I would have had no idea. But it was really important for me to do something that it wasn't about just directly impacting my friends and family. I really wanted to have an impact on people that I'd never met before. And I thought the world would just be such a better place if we all kind of weren't so insular and just really trying to, build our family. That's important, but, it wasn't about my country. It didn't really even matter where I was. I really wanted to have an impact that was beyond my own little environment. And so I wanted to show you, and it's kind of a little messed up, but the reason why, this is my family, and I think the reason why being unique and innovative is really important is that I grew up, I was one of a set of quadruplets. I'm the one, this is me, I was always screaming when I was little. But all of us have ended up literally all over the world, and I think in part because the lens that we had was wanting to be different. I wanted to, one of my brothers lived in Asia, and I had to ask him if I could, come to Asia and live there, but I wouldn't be doing anyways. So we have that as my lens, and I think it's helpful, as I'll talk through today, to really think through, what is your lens? And that's why, in part, because I am the only girl in a set of the quadruplets, and I have an older brother, that I have a very strong gender lens as well. And so a lot of what I think about is regarding women, and I think, how do you really leverage such an untapped resource in women around the world? Okay, so then I went into Wall Street. So I'll tell you, when I was at Middlebury and I majored in economics and French as a double major, and then I did math minor. I started as math major, but I couldn't hang in abstract algebra. But I had two options when I was graduating from school. I was either going to be in the Peace Corps or do investment banking. I really didn't know how to connect really my talents, and I didn't see that many careers that I wanted to emulate. I had trouble with that, and my brothers were investment bankers, and you know, when you go and work and do an internship there and get an offer, they give you the exploding offer, which you all hear about. It basically 10 days to decide. So you don't really get to come back your senior year and think through things. But I think for me, this was a good choice to go into banking because I really didn't have that idea yet, and I wasn't directed enough to start my own thing. And so I said, because I do have such a strong sense of mission, but I have no idea what I want to do, I am going to go learn something that is a skill that's hardcore. I'm going to work really hard, something that's transferable, and do that. And I was good at math and econ, so right, and they just hire you. So I did that. I went to Wall Street, and right away I knew that this wasn't going to be a life, career for me. It was quite obvious, but and also I recognized that I would never really stand out. I'd never be like the best banker because I think you have to be so passionate and really connect what you're doing to really be amazing at that. And I had colleagues who just really saw the value in the deal. And I didn't care whether Coke and Pepsi merged. I just really didn't care. So I'd get the work done, and I was good at it, but I was never going to be outstanding. And so what I said was, I'm just going to put my head down and at the same time really think through what it is that I will eventually be outstanding at. And so since I didn't know, I just started creating lists. And I'm a huge fan of lists. I create these huge kind of Excel things of like all the different potential opportunities, pros and cons, who I knew, email, when was the last time I contacted them, like, I just did that, and then I would have these weekly conference calls with, mentors, and this one woman said to me, it was really a pivotal moment, she said, I was thinking about like working at Habitat for Humanity. I wanted to work at a place that was like not touchy-feely, but like that had a mission that I cared about, and so I told her this, and she said, Katharine, follow the money. Don't go to a place where you're just going to be doing coffee and they're not going to use your skills. Go to a place that has influence and affluence and a small team. And there you're going to really be able to change things around. And by the way, if you're working at Deutsche Bank, which I was doing investment banking, and she said, why don't you check out what they do to invest in their community development? So I had a coffee with Assad Mahmoud, who runs their micro development fund, and he explained to me the concept of microfinance. And I said, this is wonderful. Here I am helping companies figure out like their trajectories and merge. And here, Deutsche Bank on the side, they have this development fund that's helping these banks. They're doing leverage loans to banks that are then lending to clients who have these businesses, and it wasn't charity. And I just thought, I was so intrigued with this concept of not charity. Like I think for me, being in the financial markets, I just really recognize the value of sustainability and how wonderful it is to engage with someone when they have an idea and really all they're lacking is kind of capital. And it just felt like, and also I was really motivated by this concept of helping all of these women have an additional business, and it really just hit a nerve. And so I added to my, and I didn't know this at the time, but this is all retrospective, but I added that I really wanted to do something that was sustainable. That wasn't about charity, but because charity dies. And why is it important to be sustainable? Because then you're not part of it in 3 years. I mean, basically what you're doing is building these institutions that don't rely on donors. You're just basically lighting something that will eventually grow because it has a business model and because the people who are running it have a direction and they're building it, but they happen to live in a system that's messed up. And so here you are having the opportunity to just inject a little bit of capital. So that's what got me into microfinance. And I didn't move right away because no one would take me, mostly. Even though I had 2 years of investment banking, it was really hard to convince someone of like why I wanted to leave my job and go into international development. I guess that's what it was called. So then I decided I was going to start my own because that was easier, right, than getting a job. And I spent 2 years basically organizing conferences. I moved to Paris, and actually just, I think this is a really great thing to do if you really want to become, like create convening points for people, even if you don't know anything about the subject. So I basically invited all these people to the first microfinance club of Paris at Deutsche Bank. And Deutsche Bank Paris had no idea what I was doing. But I just invited like the head of the World Bank and lawyers and all these people, and they were like, wow, Deutsche Bank is getting involved in microfinance. And they were in New York, but not in Paris. And so, and here I was 25, I was the only American, and I gave like the opening speech, whatever. It was really funny. But through that, I met a lot of people. And actually that's how I got my next job, is there was someone who came to my conference who sets up microfinance banks all through Asia and Africa, named Frank. And at this time, I was like ready to go, still doing banking, but I really just need, you just need that story. Like, you're gonna leave, but your parents aren't. So, or your boss, you need that story to just tell people, so it kind of seems legit. And so I met Frank, and I said, I really want to set up a microfinance bank. Like, where are you operating? And he said, you really want to go into Vietnam or Burma, Myanmar. And I said, okay, yeah. It was 5 minutes. So then I said, are you going to go there anytime soon? He said, I'm going to Manila next week. And I said, can I come with you? And just, spend the next 6 months like learning about how you do this. And he said, sure. Right? I was free, and he could obviously see that I was so passionate about this. So then I told my parents I was going to set up a microfinance bank in Vietnam. And then the next week I quit my job, saying I was going to set up a microfinance bank in Vietnam based on a 5-minute conversation. But anyway, that was my moment where it was so exciting, because I think when you need the story, but it's just like you just gotta convince yourself, and then it's kind of easy to convince other people. But once you convince yourself that this is something that you really just want to do, then you just gotta unlock all the chains that you have in your life. And so I hope you all have this moment, or you've had it, where you kind of sell everything and have a one-way ticket somewhere and just have an idea. You don't know anyone. But that for me was what it was. I don't know if you can see, this is my dad. He's come to visit me in northern Vietnam. And he can't like cross-leg he's not flexible enough to like cross-leg his legs. So it's really cute. This was, and this is our team. And I can talk about that more in Q&A. But that was really a wonderful experience of, I think, big takeaway there was we really wanted to set up really quickly, and we're only happy when we would eventually give out our first loan, but it took a long time. And so we had to really reset our expectations that like little things were important, like hiring one person or building on our loan products. We worked with Professor Carpenter on some experiments, and the whole thing was really fun. But I think it was, once we reset our expectations that it wasn't about, building the business, it was like all these little things, then it became a little bit more easier to digest, because we'd been there for a year. I had raised like $60,000 before going from friends and family who still ask me about it. So I'd come back for holidays and they'd say how it's going, and I'd say, still haven't gotten our operational license yet, but it's fine. But now the bank is up and running, and it's operationally sustainable. And we have nearly 4,000 clients, and it's just operating in the middle of nowhere, fully run by Vietnamese people and supported by the French NGO from the guy that I met at the conference. And through that experience, I just kind of really bulldozed my way into international development. I didn't really know much, and I recognized that it was really fun to start something, but really I wasn't the person to be managing it. And also I think I had a lot to learn. So my next phase was graduate school, which I had just completed my last 4 years of doing really interesting work. I'd say mostly incubation at graduate school, funnily enough. I did take courses, but I really went there to be around like-minded people, to think about ideas, and it was always creating groups where we would say, okay, let's think about water, and we'd bring in people and think about the best ways to tackle that. And so I did a number of ventures, and you could look at this array and say, these top 3, we never really did anything. And that's true. But I think it's really important to just try things and fail. really is important, because then you don't, you recognize that you can shift really easily in terms of your strategy, like you don't get so stuck up on things. And also, we did something like one of the companies was thinking about distributing products through microfinance, which is a need that I recognized while I was in Vietnam. But a big key takeaway there was that we were doing this while we were at Stanford Business School, and you can't provide a service you can't build a service when you're not there, right? I mean, it's easier to build a product, like you can incubate a product when you're at Middlebury College, but if your thing is I want to build this service, and you're not there, I mean, it's really hard to. That's really hard. So that was a really big key takeaway from that. And then the next thing, Cyclodrill was part of a course. We were working with engineers to help build a really low-cost well drilling device. And we just, a lot of this is you have to have someone who wants to take it forward. And the realization about wanting to build a product and not being in wherever you work made me think what can we do in the U.S. And so I started thinking more about what we could do in the U.S. And so that was our Karma Network, and then Oregon Jet was, Karma Network was, can we, giving with checkbooks just seems so passive. How do we engage people more using kind of social gaming and competition? And so we thought a lot about how to actually move more money, but not just money, moving, helping micro volunteering and really thinking more about on the donor side. And then I wanted to just give you talk a little bit about Oregon Jet, which was my last venture, and the thing I've been working on for the past year and a half. I was at the Kennedy School. And go to the next one, and then the next slide. And I'll give, this is I'll just give you a little, this is a little video that was done, which is nicer than me talking about it.
I advise startups that address social and environmental challenges. I'm currently working on a startup called Oregon Jet that is helping to reduce waiting times for the many Americans who are on the waiting list for organ transplants. There's a lot of disparity in waiting times for patients who are waiting for transplants in the U.S. So if you happen to live in Boston or New York, you may be waiting 5 years for your kidney transplant, whereas if you live in Memphis or Fort Lauderdale, the waiting time might be 3 months. And so what we do is we help patients move around the U.S. to get transplants earlier. Once you get the phone call that there is a match, an organ, you have to be able to get to the operating table within 6 to 8 hours, and you can't fly commercial. We have access to a scheduling company, and once you get that call, we're going to get you to the transplant center. One would think that you would try to move the organ to the patient, but the organs aren't getting moved around the country. They're allocated locally, and so we're moving patients. Somewhat of an imaginative approach, and the exciting thing right now that's going on is we're trying to get insurance companies to cover this. So this is not just a service for the very wealthy. We think that just because you live in a certain area, and just because the waiting time is 5 or 7 years, that you shouldn't have to die in the waiting list. And the reality today is that so many Americans are dying on the waiting list. Shredar, the CEO, and myself, we entered this because we saw a way to just really kind of do the right thing and save lives. And we do think that we can save 1 or 2 lives a day. When I graduated from college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to learn a skill. And I wanted to somehow translate that skill into something that mattered and really I felt would make the world a better place. So I went to Wall Street, and I spent about 4 years learning about finance and capital markets. I quit my job and found myself in northern Vietnam setting up a microfinance program for women, providing loans and savings and training to women that did not have access to capital. And so we served that role of setting up a bank that they could trust, that was going to be there for a long time so they could actually build their business. How I got here, I think, has been just jumping into things and not being scared to fail, and realizing that you can just learn so much by failing early, failing often, trying again. I can't tell you how many times in my life that my path has changed by one meeting with one individual who's really just given me an excellent opportunity that I've taken at that moment. And so I think we all have that opportunity every day to just, be open to that and realize that there's so many extraordinary opportunities to take advantage.
Okay, so OrganJet, and I want to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about startups. I think that, or maybe you can think about OrganJet and microfinance in Vietnam, all these things. It's for me, it's always been about thinking about how do I provide a service or make it more accessible. Like where areas in society are stuck. And I think I began really thinking, okay, I guess maybe I'm good at math. Maybe I should work in finance, and so how does organ transplant work into that? So now where I am is I think that I really enjoy finding areas that really are opportunities and being kind of a spokesperson for that. And so when you think about, okay, so what do I do? So I'll just do this really quickly, and I want to open up to Q&A. Some of the things that I think are helpful to figure out like what it is exactly that you'll solve, and that might evolve a lot over time, is like what makes you really angry? Are there things that you just think are really, really messed up about the world, or like maybe even about like the way, the opportunities that you had and maybe your family didn't have, or that your friends had. So you can think about it from that experience, and maybe you don't have anything that makes you really angry, in which case maybe you know someone who does, and so you're going to be the steward of kind of their vision. And so just thinking about your passion and your obsession, and again, making lists or speaking about it with your family. How do you spend your time? So I recognize that this is maybe a little bit 101 for people, but just thinking through like how do you like to engage in general with people? And this is actually an interesting question to ask your parents, like what you were like when you were like 10 or 5, because through that I think a lot of us evolved into something that we think that we should be, but I think you can learn a lot about how you were when you were little in terms of like your leadership characteristics, and you can kind of think through how you might be most effective. And this is really important, and a lot of people go to business school to learn this. But like, what are you good at? What are your strengths, and equally, what are you bad at? This is not something that you will know right away, and you'll know over time. You'll add to the list. But I really believe that we're often told to focus on our weaknesses to be balanced. And so if you're bad at something, then you'll spend 80% of your time focus on that. And I don't think that the returns are really there for that. I think that if you focus 80% on what you're good at, then you'll be incredible at it. And that's really, why you're here. And so I think unless there's something that's going to be totally crippling to you in terms of not being able to achieve your mission, like maybe it's, you can always have things that you're bad at that you're always continually working on. Like I'm always working on negotiations and kind of communication and that type of thing. But I think that it's helpful to recognize that, and then to surround yourself when you think about your team and your startup team. You really don't want to be working with people who are like you. And so that's why you need to know what you're bad at, because then you meet someone and you're like, wow, you have this thing that I don't have. Maybe it's coding or technology or whatever. And so, oftentimes we get in small groups and work and try to ideate with people who are exactly like us. But it's much more interesting to find people and complement. It's not, it's not necessarily a marriage, but it's really finding complementary skills of people and surrounding yourself with that. Bad at, same thing. And then kind of the big question, and then I think I'll open it up, but it's like, when should I do this? And I think, I've been told it's like, entrepreneurship is a calling. If you're even asking this question, then you know the answer, right? Or entrepreneurs are born, they're not made. And so just being someone who went to Stanford Business School, where it's literally, hundreds of people running around with no idea, like they just basically want to build a company, but they don't have an idea yet. I think, really tackling this from there is a problem that you want to solve. Like you're not coming in with a solution. That's really important. But I think that people can be entrepreneurial in many facets. Like, you don't have to be a social entrepreneur. I mean, you can be just innovative in your company or the way you approach a problem. It's not about being, you know, the CEO always. I think it's really an approach to tackling problems in a multidisciplinary way, and very, very importantly, that you're focused on sustainability. I mean, I think that's really what differentiates this approach than charity. And so, when should I do this? I mean, that's why there is a strong case to be built to understand how do you make things sustainable. I mean, certainly, you know, even just on the side, learning, making sure you're not scared of numbers, like making sure that you don't have to do investment banking, but just understanding that is important. But I think that if you have an idea now that you should, you know, really think about and consider doing it, because you can really bring in mentors to complement the skills that you don't have. But if you're still really thinking about, you know, maybe it's always helpful to spend a couple years in industry, or even, you know, if you have an idea for South Korea, you know, go work at that school for 2 years, and you don't have to start it on your own, but right, put yourself in that environment. And so, yeah, I mean, this is a big question, and so I don't know, it really depends. I think for me, I like to be around, I'm still, you know, I'm thinking about like what my next venture will be, and just spending a lot of time at incubators around people who have ideas, because there will be moments, you know, I have an idea for something that I eventually want to do, but it's not ready yet. It's going to take, you know, 3 years probably to kind of cultivate. I think ideas you continually add to, and so this really depends. But I see no problem in going to the private sector and consulting and building up your skills, and I see, but I don't think that that's something that you have to do at all.
So can I ask you a little more specifically about microfinance?
Sure.
So you said earlier you can hire people who know things if you have the vision.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of things do you really think, looking back, that you needed to know to get into microfinance? Personally, and then what did you need other people to know?
Oh, okay. So personally, to get in, what I needed was I needed a connection. I needed someone who already had. It depends if you're going to do a nonprofit or for-profit route. But for me to set up to establish, I needed to go under the umbrella of an organization that was legitimate. So I needed to make that first connection with Frank, who had one of those IDs that says I am not corrupt. So I needed that. Then I needed credibility, which was in the form for me of being an investment banker for 4 years, and I could build models, and I knew how to, you know, so I had that kind of, I could get into like a very hard-nosed discussion with some of the people who wanted to fund us, and they wanted to see that aspect and tell that story. And then I needed people who understood and were from the place where I was operating in. And so pretty early on, I met my co-founder, who spoke Vietnamese, and her mother, she was doing a Fulbright there. She was Vietnamese American, but her mother was from Vietnam, and so through that we got the political connections to move to where we needed to go. And then I needed money, and also the notion about money. You know, it was helpful to me that, not required, but that I had worked in banking, and so I could take time off without having a salary. And then again, I mean, you can exist in where I was living for $3 a day, I mean, easily. I mean, just it's quite hard to spend more than $15 where I was living, and so. But that was helpful that I had some resources, because I could, you know, I wasn't worried about that. But a big lesson there was that you have to think about your sustainability, and so we'd create a structure that was based on people who didn't have to think about the salary, right? But then eventually you realize that, you know, if you're going to replace yourself, you can't always assume that everyone's going to have as much optimism and enthusiasm as you, and so you want to think sustainably about how to do that. But then, so yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, I think that just having worked in a bank, if you're doing microfinance, makes a lot of sense to me. But I think you can get into microfinance certainly it makes sense that you understand financial statements. That would seem important, but then you can go into other aspects of microfinance, like really working with the client and helping them think through like what is their cash flow. And I think that really requires, you don't really need anything, you just need to be able to be someone who listens, who's willing to spend time in an area, and you'll probably discover things that haven't been discovered about users or clients, which would allow you to create new products or services that are very much needed. I mean, there's just a lot of opportunities to help people who are in systems that are messed up.
Great, thank you.
Do you have one piece of advice for students who, I'm a senior and I'm excited to go out and get my hands dirty, but I have no idea how. I'm like the person stuck a few slides back where there are like a lot of options and I don't know what to do with them all. So do you have, I've just been asking.
What kind of your options? What are some of them?
Not investment banking.
Okay.
I missed that boat. But I don't know, just any type of, like, I have ideas, but not necessarily like an enterprise that's ready at all. And I've been like a student intern at the center, so I've been surrounded by all of these great people and things and loving it, but I just don't know what like avenue to take or try.
I think someone said something to me that was really helpful. They were like, are you, and I was wanting to be, this is what I really wanted to be like Jacqueline Novogratz. And so, and they said like, are you Jacqueline, or, you know, are you like number 2? Right, like, and are you Bill Drayton, or are you like number 2? And I was like, at the time, I was surrounded by all of these entrepreneurs, and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely number 2. I mean, I'm like the Paul Farmer. But so I think it's important to figure out like what would be your ideal role, and you can move in between them too, right? Because then like if you have an idea, then you can like kind of be the face of the company. And so thinking through, because if you're number 2, then that means that you need to be like really good at operations. And so you could then go work with someone who's really good at operations. So you're thinking about a role. I always say it's great to, whenever you meet someone, any of your lectures, I always ask people who are the top 3 people in whatever field I'm interested in. And make them give you a list, like you'll do this to me. And then, you know, if you're bold enough, then you make them introduce you to them. But not everyone likes to, not everyone likes to do that. But I think that then creates a list. Whenever you meet someone, you just get 3 names and then follow up with them. And, you know, within 3 weeks, you're blowing up network.
It's worth knowing that the first person Lauren met in this field was Jacqueline.
No, so I brought these because this is my weird way of like organizing. So I have these back from like 2004, and this is, I'm actually sad that I went electronic 2 years ago, and so it's not as awesome. But anyone I ever met, anything, meeting with Jacob Hewlett, I put them in my book, and I wrote like the 4 or 5, you know, things that they suggested. And so it's fun. I was going through some of this stuff. I was thinking about this talk, because for me, like when I have a meeting with someone, you forget, right? And I remember by writing, and so I would just create these things, and then create these long lists of people, and then always ask people who are the 3 most exciting people, or in this field, who are the 3 people that I have to meet, and then eventually the same name would be coming up. Like when I was trying to work with Jacqueline Novogratz and like all these applications, someone told me, 10 times in a row, they're like, Willie Foote, Root Capital, right? So I said, who is this Willie Foote at Root Capital who does SME lending? Because everyone tells me that I need to meet this person. And so I stalked them, I'm a stalker, I completely stalked them, and found out through someone at the team that he's going to be at San Francisco Terminal. And no, I mean, I reconnected to them, and so the guy who I eventually became my boss liked me, so he was like, if you really want to meet Willie Foote, he's at SFO Terminal, whatever. And so I left my class, it just jumped up and took my car and went to the terminal, and that's how I got one of my internships. Just sat with him for 2 hours, and he showed me videos. He's just in Liberia, had so I think you can do that even with people who are like him. Like he's like impossible. He doesn't respond to email barely. But you can find. I've always become really good friends with the assistants, or the people who know where they're going to be, where these people are going to be. And then they tell you. No, but I mean, because they would love to meet you. It's just they don't really have time, right? And so I think you got to make time for them. Like whether it's like, I'll get in your car from the foundation to the airport, you have 40 minutes, like, and they have no one to talk to, right? Anyways, yeah, I've always done that.
So life advice, loiter around airports.
No, yeah, I gotta figure out where they are. But I think, I mean, that's the point though, like once you figure out what, so it's like either you figure out like what it is, like whether it's like, I wanna do microfinance or I wanna do, you know, children's education, and then you figure out all the conferences and try to go to those and try to get the school to pay for that. And then you try to, then you figure out who are all the big names in the field, just know them, because people will mention them, figure out who's on their board. Then you know the people and you have a lay of the land of the people. And when you meet someone who's kind of approachable, you can figure out, have them introduce you to a couple of people. Pretty soon, then you're in, right? And so, and then you're kind of around and you can start throwing around ideas, and maybe you'll volunteer at a place. Most likely you'll have to volunteer at a place. Just volunteer time. That's how I got into microfinance. I just said, I'm completely free. And you also have to just show up. Just like, I'm in Manila. Like, you're not going to kick me out of your office. And so, right, because they're not going to take someone from Middlebury, like, they don't even know you and pay you and all this stuff. So you just have to, like, make it really hard for them to kick you out in the beginning, right? Because it actually is pretty high barrier to entry, international development, and weirdly enough, social innovation. So I say just start your own, or, you know, make your way in.
So you were telling us earlier how your math skills and your comfortability with math culture underway, but I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as completely comfortable with math. I am more humanities oriented. I'm actually a philosophy major before I switched to business this semester. But as I think more and more about the possibility of becoming an entrepreneur and being a business person, I am realizing the importance of having math skills. So with the 2 semesters that I have here at Middlebury, I'm trying to take as many math courses and try to hone my skills. But then, as you said, it's probably a best strategy to focus on what you're good at. So like, probably met a lot of people with different characteristics, people who have such strong math background as you are, and people who are coming from different parts of the spectrum. So what kind of advice can you give to people who are like me, who are not really math oriented, I guess?
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. I think it's just really important, especially for social enterprise, to just be comfortable, to not be scared of numbers. Yeah, I mean, and I also think a lot of people who were in liberal arts who I've worked with, you know, they're not super comfortable with math, but you can learn accounting, you can learn the types of stuff that you need to know, and most likely, if that's not something you've been drawn to, that's not the role that you're going to play. And so, yeah, I mean, I just think that figure out like what it is that you like to do and what you're good at, and then that'll be the role that you play in this organization. And if you're building it, then you recognize that that's not your skill, so you're going to team up with someone who's like the kind of quant data-driven person. So yeah, I mean, I would really kind of like take an inventory of what you're good at, and you can still, I mean, we're always investing in ourselves, so taking a math course just to, you know, even, you know, just to personally feel comfortable, or, you know, just to have it. And yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people, liberal arts people who like, just a lot of, I've come from an economics program, which I think is really useful, and also just a really nice balance to business, where you're, you know, we were thinking about like are we doing more harm than good, and actually measuring that. And so, and I was learning like, you know, statistical programs, but I always knew that I will never be the person hired to do stata. Like I always knew that. I always knew that I would hire someone who's really good at stata. But I wanted to, it's like coding, like I'll never be a coder, but I'd like to be slightly fluent with the language, so I can figure out if you know, if people are good or not. So I think being slightly fluent, but focusing on your skill. That would be my recommendation.
We have time for one more question.
Sure.
So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that goes back to your question about sort of what being here at Middlebury, what were some of the competencies that you felt were really helpful? I think actually you've just hit a lot of them, like, your psychology, you do coding maybe for data, or, economics, you do data. There's lots of different skill sets that you're doing, but more importantly, you're doing the writing, right? You're doing a lot of writing here and communicating and research.
Writing is huge. That is one of the things actually that that is one of the skills that I got from Middlebury. And so many people have told me that, especially in business school where everyone just writes just bullet points, and you can just, communication and writing is critical. So that's a good point.
Middlebury writers are really good writers.
Yeah.
Oh my God, so first of all I want to express I didn't know that writing is that important, and I didn't understand why it's important at all. But now...
It is. It's so important because most people can't... the ability to write concisely and with just correct grammar, it just really, especially in kind of the business world and the fast pace, it's really, really important. We were hiring writers for Oregon Jet. People could succinctly, take our message and just, whether it's grant writing or even just helping us build a message and just get it out there, marketing, communication.
My question, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking whether it's possible to start an internship for me after the first year of university in social enterprise.
Yeah.
It's possible? So I have that set of skills?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's when you go talk to Liz.
You do. And you know what you can do? Just figure out, go find a company that you, or a social enterprise that you really like, and explain to them why their writing is terrible and how you can be so much more effective. And tell them, just be like, I'm appalled at, the communication that you have, and here's what I will do, and send them a sample based on their company.
Okay.
Promise you, you'll get an internship.
Can everyone join me in thanking Katharine?
Thank you.